So I want to put this question to you. Think about it, right? I'm going to go very slow here. Is formal education a prerequisite for a deep tech career? All right, just pause there for a bit. I'll let you think about it, right? Do you need a formal education? Do you need a degree for a career in deep tech? Do you need a master's for a career in deep tech? What do you think? Think about it, right? Because we've all seen or heard the rise of major tech companies led by incredible individuals who really did not complete their formal education in their field of expertise. Microsoft, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, for example, they all dropped out of college. They dropped out of school. But hold on, I'm not asking you to drop out, okay? I want you to think about this question. Is formal education a prerequisite for a deep tech career? Of course, don't drop out now immediately, please, right? But really, this question that we want to explore, because how crucial might formal specialization in tech be, especially in the deep tech space? This will be the key question for this upcoming debate, which I'm so excited about, which I'm sure many of you are tuning in for as well. So the formal motion for today's debate that we're going to have right now is formal education a prerequisite for a deep tech career? Our contestants today are leaders in their fields and institutions. Now, in every debate, we have the for motion and against the motion. So I want to introduce our respective speakers for and against the motion. Our speakers for the motion are Amrish Nair, CEO and founder, Biorithm, and Rajesh Elara Mohan, Assistant Professor, SUTD. Welcome to the team. On the other side, we have our speakers presenting their case against the motion. Gary Low, CEO and founder, Dimuto, and Santhosh Viswanathan, Managing Director, Asia Pacific and Japan Intel Corporation. Our moderator for this debate, Wang Poon, Director, Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities, SUTD. All right, so we have an exciting debate up ahead. And after hearing their perspectives on this topic, we will invite all of you to take a quick poll to see where you stand. Is formal education needed or is it not needed? But first, straight to the debate. So I'd like to hand the time over to our moderator, Wang. Over to you.
Thank you, Lester, and a very good afternoon to one and all, our panelists as well as the participants for joining us virtually over the internet. It's an exciting time to be in deep tech, and an important question is, of course, what does it need to get into deep tech and to have a career? Why? Because in the next 3 to 5, maybe even shorter than that, we'll need about double the number of workers, digital workers in Singapore to meet the needs of industry. And to help us understand better whether we need to have a formal qualification, formal education for a deep tech career, we have our distinguished panelists today on the for side and of course on the against side, and they've been introduced. Debates usually come with for and against, that's normal, but because this is happening over virtually, I think there's an opportunity for us to also have you participate in this debate. And you will be participating in 3 ways. One is we'll be having 3 polls today, one before we begin, one after they've made their representations, and one right at the end. So you can see whether they have indeed changed your minds about what we feel about the topic. And in some senses, we're talking about formal education. Maybe this is your way to grade the panelists as well. Give them A or B, depends on everything. The other way is, of course, we're keeping the Q&A open, as you can see. And what we're going to try to do is, as you ask your questions, the panelists and myself will keep an eye out. And if we can address the questions while we are talking, we will do so, rather than wait till the end. And on top of that, if you have a point you want to make to inspire us or to inspire any other panelists, please do that so that we keep this session engaging, interactive, and more like a conversation between for, against, and you. So with that, we'll get started very quickly. We'll start with Amrish, who is going to tell us a little bit about what he thinks is his view on whether formal education is needed for a deep tech career. Amrish, please.
Thanks so much. And it's really about speaking from my perspective as well, right? And as a startup founder, and I founded a startup, Biorithm, who's developing tech in the remote monitoring space for women's health. And I mean, coming from that perspective, I mean, even anecdotally, right? When you start the company, at the tip of the tongue of every investor is, how do we know you can do this? How can you validate that what you're doing is correct scientifically, technically? And that's really important. And, it's really coming from that perspective of, you say you can do something, now shows you can. And often it comes with the expectation of a formal education, either in the technological space or in whatever deep expertise that you belong to. And in my case, it was electrical engineering and the ability to actually pick out remotely monitored signals, clean them, compress them, transmit them, analyze them. And it was actually a very technical academic space. And so really coming from that and looking from a startup perspective, what do you need in a deep tech career, especially growing from a single person startup all the way and growing further and further. And if you look towards an MNC, the requirements may, I suppose, subside a little once you have a greater support system, once you have technical teams around you, specialist departments. But looking from where I come from and how do you grow something, it's so fundamental that the core team needs to know how to achieve what you want to achieve. And that generally comes with a little bit of academic knowledge. And, really, the arguments we've heard also tend to conflate digital and deep tech. And I think that's a very important point to note. And, I say this to everyone, that everyone needs to be a digital worker. It's not that we need more digital workers. Everyone needs to be a digital worker in the future economy. And that's different from developing the core IP needed to transform or to disrupt or to solve the intractable problems. And, it's really about understanding that the digital worker will be the basic unit of work, very much like how a factory worker was in the 1970s. And, it's true. And, understanding the fact that everyone needs to understand analytics, data, what they mean for their job. A HR person can't punt, the digital responsibilities to an analyst. HR needs to be the analyst themselves. But then again, it's important not to conflate the two, deep tech and the requirements for everyone to be digital. And I mean, even looking at that, a formal education, what it means to have a formal education is going to evolve. Everything's going to come with a piece of paper, regardless of whether you are coming from a formal school or whether you even took a MOOC by Andrew Ang, right? Who, by the way, still teaches at Stanford. And so what you're getting is snippets of a formal education. And how do you put those snippets together to really become the problem-solving, analytical employee that everybody wants? Fundamentally, how do you solve problems? And studying like how I did, electrical engineering, right? We studied, electronics, whatever it was 11 years ago. My professor's going to be really upset that I can't remember what I studied. But how do we put together different aspects of a formal education, sort of interdisciplinary, multi-dimensional, and form new types of education that will still come with requirements for how do you validate your skills? How can someone authenticate that you can do what you do? And I really think that the need to have digital workers in Singapore is actually a false one. And, the need that, we're going to be short of workers. Digital actually transcends boundaries. It's going to become a very important issue for Singaporeans going forward if we don't become the type of employees that are attractive to employers. The whole world's our oyster at this point. If we need deep tech talent, machine learning talent comes in many forms. They speak many languages and they reside in many different cities. And we're no longer constrained to hiring in Singapore. And that is one of, I would say, the problems of the digital economy that's going to face Singaporeans going forward, is that we're no longer competing with people coming into Singapore, we're competing with the world. And that's why, more than ever, to create that competitive edge, how do we solve problems using snippets of a formal education to form a more broad-based and complete education? But that being said, formal education will evolve and will become just that. It's the same name that's gonna sort of encompass a broader aspect of what we call formal education right now. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's almost like saying everybody needs to know math, but not everybody needs to be a mathematician.
Exactly.
I mean, just to bring it close to home, subjects that we may have done in school.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So now that we've heard one opinion of the four, maybe let's go to against. Gary?
Well, I think the opponent of four is definitely sort of like agreeing with us, because he's actually saying that formal education as we know today is going to change. So in other words, we are saying that the formal education that we know today is not going to be as relevant, and therefore actually our opponent is actually against the topic. So thank you very much, and this is probably the start. And I think as a founder and also someone who's actually been in this space for a while of startups, I'm definitely not one of those candidates that is a founder of a deep tech startup, right? So this is one of those things that people talk about as saying that, what education do I have in terms of deep tech? Absolutely nothing. I've been a banker, a financer. I've been in finance, and the only formal education I ever had was in applied finance. And then when I started Dimuto, it was a journey where I sort of combined real life experiences of what I did in finance. Maybe I would consider high finance because there's a lot of things that we did that was applied. And then after that, I went become a farmer. I actually ran a company that was growing fruits and vegetables and basically selling it throughout the world of basically global trade. Then when I came out and say, we wanted to do this thing on Dimuto was to basically track and trace fruits and then making sure that we can actually digitize them. People say, oh, first of all, why do we need that? You know, supply chain has been around, farming has been around for thousands of years. So, but it's been doing the same thing in the old way for a long, long time. Then when we say we wanted to do it, then it says, well, you need to combine a few things to make these things work. And this is where the formal education sometimes limits the way we think, where people think in silos. People think in columns. You know, they go deep, but they don't go wide. And sometimes in this world, as we apply, as we change, I think my economics training, I think, is probably the closest I can think about it, where you go back to Adam Smith's theory of demand and supply, and you look at things a little bit wider, right? Things that are a little bit intangible, you know, like what the economics people like to say is, you know, we think about opportunity costs, the intangibles. Of course, you talk to the people who are accountants, you know, we call them the bean counters for a reason because they want to see the physical. So I think this is where the change has happened. We need to see certain things. When I started off by saying, we got to see trade in a bigger way rather than being siloed. And I think this is where formal education sometimes limits the ability to sort of like think wider, because everybody tend to take a paper or formal education to just keep going deeper. So for us, I think I'm against it in a way that it may limit it if we basically just says that this is how it works. But I also will say that with some form of formal education, it does sets the mind, it does help framing certain things. But really, it all comes back to the person. I think education, it's about learning, curiosity, knowledge, sharing, collaborating, and discovering. And I think this is what's missing in the way we've been doing it. We've been so formal that we forgot the informal. And I think this is quite a focus, and therefore I'm against that topic.
Right. Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. Maybe we could do a little short poll at the moment, just to kind of see where everyone stands now that you've heard the first two speakers. I think the poll would be open to you now through the organizers. And if we could just get you to respond to the poll. Is formal education a prerequisite for a deep tech career? Let's see whether you think it's a yes or no. And we'll see your results before we move on to the other two panelists to give us their opinions. I thought it was a nice way that Gary put it, that it's about, we've been so concerned about the formal education that we forgot about the informal. And that so much of what we do at work in school, what we remember is the informal rather than the formal, and what we take away. Yeah. And I don't know, Amrish, I don't know whether you have any opinions about Gary saying that you're actually on his side.
No, I mean, it's really about what it means to have a formal education as well as a prerequisite for a career, right? And formal education for me comes with a certificate. That's what it does. It's an institution coming with a certificate. And all I'm saying is these institutions will change. And that's why, it's still going to be called a formal education, but it's going to look different. And looking at a career in deep tech, it's still going to be a lot of the requirements to solve those intractable problems. So, but Gary's point is very well taken. The informal part of things are so important, but that doesn't discount the formal as well. So, yeah.
I guess the other interesting thing is sometimes we also conflate formal with structured.
Exactly.
So picking up knowledge structure sometimes is important, especially with the new area.
Yep.
I think the poll results are ready. And shall we just take a quick look and so that we know where our baseline is? Oh gosh. So formal education, is it required? Is it a prerequisite? 56% say no and 44% say yes, right? So,
Sorry about that. You have to pick me. You have to pick it up from where I
the gain side is in the lead, but maybe Mohan, you can turn the tide and turn the tables.
Hey, hello. Yes.
Maybe they are on your side, right?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I see Gary as a great example and product of formal education. Formal education as such has been evolving over the years from the days of the chalk and the blackboard to computers, to internet, to recent virtual reality and augmented reality. So formal education has been continuously evolving, producing robust structures where we can build upon accessories, beauty and aesthetics in the form of informal dynamic training and skill set. So I see Gary as an example where he's equipped with fundamentals from formal education, and with that as a basis, he has moved on to pursue, to add additional and to excel. So with, and a beautiful analogy in this case is to view formal education as a house where we live. We have the house and we renovate it for every few years, periodically, right, depending on the trends. So I see the IT, the trends of mobile communication, the trends of robotics, the trends of cybersecurity as renovations that a house can experience with time. But the house remains the same. It provides the structure, and without the structure, the trends alone is fluid and imaginary. Structure is always needed. So imagine you are in a deep tech company. Myself, I'm a professor with University, Singapore University of Technology and Design, and also co-founder of two deep tech robotic startups that develop cleaning robots, in other case, ship maintenance robots. With these cases, we have engineers that come in with different deep tech expertise. Imagine you are one of them going there with knowing sensors, knowing actuators and how robots move around, but without the fundamentals that comes from structured and formal education on how to develop novel and disruptive AI approaches to enable the robots to move smoothly, clean efficiently, perform hydroblasting, grid blasting efficiently to significantly improve productivity. And that's only possible with a formal education that is wide, also deep. Let's go into some numbers. If we look at the deep tech companies that are in the forefront, be it with Google, be it with Tesla, with engineers, over 95% of them hold a college degree. And over 40% of them hold postgraduate degree, master's and doctorate. This is from a recent report from Revelio Labs. And the same report goes on to say that specifically with Tesla, we have 95% holding college degrees. Let's look at another statistics. IPs are fundamental to deep tech companies because these are a property that make them in the forefront. If we look at Google, which holds over 130,000 patents from Google patent, and with Dell that holds over 30,000, a hardware company. And with these, a vast majority of the patents were produced by doctorates. And Brookings report even goes further to articulate that over 45% were filed by doctorate holders and over 70% by postgraduate holders. So a formal education and a structured education is essential for a deep tech companies and also to produce disruptive solutions to go beyond. Even going further with some of these pioneering or visionary leaders in the market in deep tech sector, like James Dyson with his products and on in the market, very successful. He has established a formal education university, Dyson Institute of Engineering and Technology in 2017, offering formal programs, but in a new way, in an evolved way from traditional education, but still in using formal approaches that provides boundaries, that provides structures. Even closer in India, Reliance Industries has pioneered Geo University as recently as 2018, and they're going to have students intake this year in 2021. Also, another example of a leading tech giant aspiring technology, deep tech technology company that is establishing university with new ideas, but within the bounds of a formal structure. There can be visionary individuals with or without formal degree, but they need thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, well-trained, formally educated engineers and scientists holding master's PhD to make that vision into a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So very much along the same spirit that things are evolving as well. I'm not sure if that will play into the hands of the against camp, and maybe I'll see if Santhosh has a view on that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me here. And, you know, the benefit I get going last is I get all the views and I can really dig into each of them. So one of the key things, what I will, you know, talk to the online audience here is that what I want to leave you with is probably 3 key reasons on why there is no need for formal education to be successful in a deep tech career. Now, the first reason is the cycle of innovation. If you look at it in the past, I mean, take from coal to electrification to compute to internet, probably took about 100 years for each of these big changes to happen. And that 100 years, we had the luxury or the opportunity to build this massive education system, train workforces, bring them into being productive, and then find jobs, and the cycle repeated. But what's happened in the last 2 decades or so, I mean, once you saw the internet that happened, the smartphones came in, you saw cloud computing rising just 5 years ago, then you see AI and 5G around the corner. These disruptions and these big shifts in the way we work and the way we live is all happening in a matter of less than a decade, right? And that cycle of innovation is probably going to change even more faster. So we won't have the luxury or time to complete a big formal education and then join the workforce and then be productive. And many of these institutions and many of these structured approaches have all been built and continued the same way for so many years without any disruption. So I think the first one is that, the cycle of innovation. The second one, which I want the audience to probably think about, is the cost for this formal education. I mean, if you think about just the US crisis on student loans, it's touching $2 trillion by the end of this year, right? That's bigger than credit card loans and you know, car loans combined together, right? Just in the US. The amount of money that parents and even students are putting in to go get this formal education is far greater than what many of them would make over their lifetime, right? And the increase of this fees is probably about, it's going at about 8 times higher than the increase of wages in many of these countries. So the cost of this formal education far outweighs the benefits of that formal education that you're attaining. The third one, which I think is connected to the first one, is because of this change and disruption that we're seeing in today's era, the kind of jobs, and IDC had this data which said that 40% of the jobs in the next 10 years have not been invented yet, right? Which means what you're getting trained for, what you're learning for, is not probably what you're going to be employed in, right? So what's the point of learning what you're training in? And then the question comes in of you know, and I know many of the conversations around here saying that, hey, we need, it's the foundation, it's the fundamentals. Now, just to go acquire that foundation and fundamentals, if there's a higher cost that you have to go spend and a higher cost of time, not just the money, then that's a huge price to pay. Many of the generations that you go look at, you know, that are coming into the workforce now are not going to have the luxury of one single career throughout their lives. They're going to have multiple careers because of this innovation cycle that's accelerated, which means they have to start learning and reinventing all the time. So the key part, I know you voted just slightly above that 50% mark. So when you get the next poll, you've got to remember these 3 key things. First is what I told you about the innovation cycle. It's faster than ever before. Second, the cost that you're spending is phenomenal, right? Don't burn that money there. In that sense, go learn skills, go acquire experiences that will strengthen what you do. The last one is that distinct careers that you're going to have, multiple careers around the corner. How many times will you go back to college to learn? That's what I want to leave the audience with.
Thank you, Santhosh. And I can see the questions are coming in. So maybe before we do a second poll to see how the opinions may have changed, I see there's one question that's really zipping up to the top of the charts, if they say call it, to each of the panel member, right? Within your workforce that you have, how many were hired based on formal qualifications and why? So maybe if I can just get you all to quickly respond to that and see whether the audience's opinions might change based on what your response is.
Yeah, I mean, probably I can start with, and I'll probably start by leaving you with a quote that our founder said. Robert Noyce said this: "Don't be encumbered by the past. Go out and do something wonderful." So if there's a history of searching for degrees, and if there's a history of hiring, and I know we had a few data points that said that large tech companies have 95% graduates and master's degrees, because that was the history that we lived in. That's not the future that we're trying to go build for, right? So if the basis is on that history is not good. Many companies are still hiring based on degrees and certification because they need a validation of what it is. And I think at Intel, we are making those changes. We are looking at skills. How do we assess for skills? What kind of testing methodologies that we have where skills can be validated, and then really use hiring on the basis of skills. So we are starting to make that shift, right? And I just hope that the industry rallies far aggressively on the same as well.
Yeah, so that's a very important point. So maybe if I were allowed to just slightly modify the question, maybe as you respond, the question might also be, how are your hiring practices changing, right? Given what we just discussed today. So maybe if I can get anyone to...
Yeah, and it's a great point. And, I completely agree that blinding your education section of your CV is actually very important because it avoids hiring bias. And especially
you do
towards...
that now? You blind
We do that, but I mean, what we've found is that in order to build the products that we need, the markets that we need, the people that we've hired eventually do have the qualifications that come with the formal degree as well. Even though we've made that, we've tried to blind it to where they got their degree from, what the degree is in, whether it's an education or not, whether they had a formal education or not. It's quite critical that we do that so that we give fair opportunity to everyone. But it's always come back down to the final candidates eventually do have those educational qualifications. So, I mean, does it allow them to bring anything extra to the table? I mean, the questions are asked, is it the name of the institution that's driving the cost of that educational debt rather than the education in itself? Would a college anywhere in the US provide just as good an education as Harvard, for example, at 10 times lower cost? And we're finding that, in Vietnam, we're hiring from universities I previously had not heard of, but phenomenal technical talent, phenomenal. And it's really, even I find that if we do blind, if we hire for skills, it does end up that way. So, yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting experience for me, never having hired and building a team of about 15 now. But that's just the way it ended up for us.
For those that you hired in Vietnam, you said you hired from universities that you may not have hired from, say, a few years ago. Where did they pick up the technical talent?
So it comes to some of the points we've been talking about. A lot of it is hunger, actually. You've had people who have not used the internet until they're 21 and gotten a formal education at 21 to 23 or 24, and now they're world-class coders. Whenever I've had the privilege of having the internet since I was, 10, and I'm nowhere close to having these skills. So it all comes down to hunger, plus how do you use that hunger to drive you further in your career? And a lot of that hunger in especially the developing economies drives them to degrees, formal education, higher education, which may come at much lower costs in these countries. But then again, in Singapore, when we hire as well, Singaporeans are a fundamental part of the company. We find that everyone tries to strive towards a degree. Again, I admit that may not be necessary in some cases. But at the end of the day, I think it's just the nature of the workforce that we're hiring. Everyone does come with at least a polytechnic degree or a university degree. But yeah, essentially when we blind, that's what exactly we're looking for. We're looking for the hunger. And that's what drives a startup. But combined with the hunger to acquire new technical knowledge, that's key.
So, I mean, since yours is the form motion, it sounds like the hunger and the availability of the non-formal, the informal knowledge sources that are available out there accentuates the value, right, of
Yes.
the degree. And so much so that now, even when you go to a different university, the two reinforce each other.
Exactly.
Anyone else wants to add to the response to the question?
I think for myself as an employer, I definitely think that the history that my fellow panelists have actually said is actually a very important point in terms of Singapore. Our population has been educated in a certain way. We pride ourselves having a wonderful education system. We have formal education that we've been pressing on since we were young. We went through a lot of the good schools, and then we basically have this whole institution's mindset that has actually come about. From my kids in primary school, doing the PSLE, to the O-levels, to the A-levels, and now I'm worrying about my A-level daughter going into the which university. Now, this is more like a historical, traditional, and things that has been done in the past that we're still living with it in the present. Now, does it really mean that I am only hiring because I only look out for these people, or because of the fact that these people all went through the same education system as me, and therefore they came with a formal education? So it's really a situation where we live with the present and we live with what we have. But that doesn't mean that we don't change. And this doesn't mean that I think all of the panelists here actually recognize is that the world is changing, times are changing, and the education that we are talking about and the formality of that education and the structuredness of that education is changing. And I think this is the key point. We're saying that now what we're looking for beyond the interviews, my team will always say that, Gary, before you actually see the candidate for the next round, let me do all the necessary testing and, can they code, can they do the necessary things? Because we're involved in AI, we're involved in hyperspectra, and then we're involved in cloud, and we're involved in IoT. Now, I have no technical background. So the kind of questions that I ask is like, your parents, your siblings, where do you go to school? What were your parents doing? What do you see the world is, right? The thinking behind it. How does this affect you? How has this changed? And why is this career that you want to come in important to you? Is it for deep tech, for the sake of deep tech? Or is it because you really want to be a part of a change where climate change affects finance, right? That whether we save the whales or not is going to affect finance. So in the past, when I was a young banker, I went into finance because it's hip. It was lucrative, right? But now the people who are coming into the world is saying, no, I want to be involved in deep tech because I think technology is going to change the world. And I think the technology for good is going to change the world. And not all finance is bad, but let's make sure that the good that we are trying to do is all about trying to get that same mindset together. So I think what we are looking for is, besides the structure, besides the fact that you came from a formal education, I think what drives that person. I think our opposition mentioned things about, the hunger. And I think that drives what every one of us has, the purpose, right? What drives your purpose to wake up and say, I want to join a deep tech and I want to be in deep tech? Because if that purpose is to say, use technology for the good, then I think that's going to basically be a big driving force for us to actually hire the people for the job.
Thank you, Gary. Mohan?
So I see that technologies like internet, augmented reality, virtual reality are enabling the existing education system to continuously evolve and to account and empower these hungry students. And even initiatives in local universities, moving from traditional schools of engineering in mechanical, electrical, computer engineering, moving to more product development, bringing different disciplines together. At times are transdisciplinary efforts, bringing finance, engineering, medicine all together in producing innovative outcomes. And same is true with entrepreneurship efforts. The entire landscape of formal education is continuously evolving, and the technologies become enablers in this process of equipping the hungry graduates and students access to knowledge beyond the traditional limits of the classroom, and they become integral part of the structural education.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's because of the sheer diversity of skills you need to succeed and to solve a problem. The university might be in a good position to pull it all together and make it in a formal program. But that's also Gary's point, right? Because things are so diverse, the university cannot provide everything. So please don't rely on formal education. So, if the audience is completely confused, I fully understand that. I'm going to try to help you resolve that in a short while. But let me just go to the second time we're going to have the poll again to see if your opinions might have changed based on what the panelists have said. So if we could just flash the same poll question again and get the audience to respond again, and we'll see whether your opinions or your views have changed. So the poll is up, right? So just take about 10 seconds and the results should be ready in about a minute. Meanwhile, I'll chat a little bit more with my panelists. Probably what I'll do for the panelists is I think the nature of the questions that I'm seeing, and I'll talk about them later, a lot is about what is formal education, what is not, and do you need some of it, and then maybe not so much of it. So maybe in the next part, if I get each of you to share your opinions, my question will be more along the lines that how can you take full advantage of formal education? And how can you take full advantage of things outside of formal education? And what I'll do is, once the poll results are out, I will just flash a few of those questions so you kind of see the spirit of what the audience is asking, and so that we can cover as many of them as possible. I'm told the poll questions, the poll responses are ready, so let's take a look whether there's been a change. If you recall, it's a 56% no previously. Oh, the no cam is really taking this out on the yes cam, right? So, gotta work harder, Amrish. Mohan. Right, so for the audience members, I'm not sure if while you're busy taking the poll, if you heard what I said, I'll do for the next segment of this session. I thought a lot of the questions have to do about the role of formal education and the role of informal aspects of education. They're outside of the formal part. And there are a few questions here. I will flash them in a short while so you can see them. But the thing that I would like the panelists to touch on next, in this next 15 to 20 minutes, will be to ask, how can you take full advantage of formal education? And how can you take full advantage of the informal elements outside of formal education? And I think the reason is very clear why I'm asking those two questions, because if I look at some of the questions that follow, right? So for example, if you look at the question from Beryl, she's asking, what about MOOC? Where do they fit, and are they considered part of formal education? Are they viewed as certification by companies, right? So we'll make sure we take a look at that. Another question that was interesting was they asked, let me move this up, by Lisa. If you can see that very soon. Other than having formal education, is it about the level of education? So if you recall, the first was about MOOCs, online courses. This is about, is it the level that we're really talking about, right? So let me just take care of that. The next question, let me move that up from Alistair, right? If you need to, this is really about expertise and knowledge base, and apparently she knows what she's talking about, right? And I'm sure Amrish knows what she's talking about. So if you need to do analysis in PCA wavelets, and I'm assuming here talking about if you need to do any analysis that requires a body of knowledge, established scientific knowledge, do you take somebody with a degree in those areas, or do you take somebody who's willing to learn, right? So MOOCs, level of education, and whether if you need to do something with a strong body of knowledge, right? So think about that. And then let me take this question from Paley again. Paley's in our second question. Is it that formal qualifications are an entry point, and that informal is about how you continuously improve? Right? We've talked a little bit about how education is evolving as well, right? So without belaboring the questions too much, maybe just based on those four things, right? MOOCs, right? Level of education, body of knowledge, and whether they are needed at different stages. Maybe if I can, since the 4cam is behind, I'll let you go first. Right? Tell us, right? Change our minds, right? Tell us that formal education is important and how we can take full advantage of it.
So, I mean, looking at that question is basically a type of education, where you get it from, and fundamentally to what level do you go to, right? And what depth of knowledge do you go to? And looking at how we hire, I mean, that's the best starting point for me. Looking to how we hire, we always hire looking at how can you solve our problems. And, someone coming in must be able to solve our problems. It's not about the position, level of knowledge. It's if you can solve a problem for us, that's great. And we have obviously different levels of positions. If you come in as a senior scientist looking to develop new technologies in compression, you need to understand the fundamental mathematics behind how this works. And that, even looking at a bachelor's degree level, someone may not have. But however, if we're looking to build a team under that senior scientist, that's when we start looking at people willing to learn. How do we actually build up skills in people who have the basic knowledge, but who can really broaden their thinking outside of the narrow field of the science? So it's about building teams with sort of complementary competencies. Not everyone who comes into the team needs to have the highest level of experience in a particular technical area, but looking at how we build a team from core theoretical knowledge to sort of youthful exuberance to help solve that problem. And that answers the question on, from Alison, where, very specific technical knowledge in some very key areas. And you mentioned techniques, and what we're not looking for is techniques. I'm not looking to hire a person to do this. I'm not hiring a person to do machine learning. I'm hiring a person to solve a problem. And it's not about, I say you use this technique and you only use this technique for the next year. That's almost nonsensical in today's development world. That's why looking at problems constrained by machine learning, constrained by all these things, I think it's the wrong way to go about doing things. You have your whole arsenal of tools, and being able to identify which tool or even developing new tools to solve the problem is key. So if you can bring that level of thinking to the table, it should not matter whether you're a bachelor's, master's, or PhD. And we've seen some really outstanding bachelor's degree candidates who think like graduate students, and because they bring that level of problem solving to the table. I think Gary's correct. It's just the nature of the workforce that we have that you don't see many people below graduate or degree level in Singapore or diploma level in Singapore, because we're all driven to that level. But I think that formal education is so important to give you that breadth of what's possible. And instead of the MOOCs, what they do is they expand your knowledge in certain specific areas. And that's really where you want to see the real benefit of MOOCs. It's how do you gather quick competencies in different areas, and like as Santhosh says, as the cycle of innovations progress. These innovations were funded by decades of formal knowledge. 5G didn't happen yesterday. They happened over the past 3 decades of PhDs in MIT, Stanford, India, Australia, UK. So core competencies plus expanding new boundaries. I think that's really key. And that's my take on it.
Yes. Yeah, so I want to focus on 3 important points. For an engineer or a scientist in a deep tech industry, social skills are very important. And a formal education provides plenty of venues to build up these 21st century skill sets, be it communication, be it leadership, working in multidisciplinary teams, bringing people with different expertise together. And that is only possible in the case of formal education because it's structured, it moves fluid from one semester to another, connecting courses, connecting schools, connecting universities, even transnational, bringing students from multiple countries together in a common forum or in a context of a specific topic. So formal education provides these venues to build up soft skills that are essential, and that too in a controlled and a balanced way between the depth, width, and the engagement. And that is possible with formal also because of accreditation bodies, validations that are regular, looking at the curriculum and reviewing the curriculum on almost an annual basis. Great examples to that end are Hewlett-Packard and Facebook, where the co-founders met in a university. So universities become a catalyst, bringing great minds together. And for them to come together, share their ideas, and to synthesize powerful ideas and vision for the future. And universities go beyond just transfer of knowledge to equip individuals with skill sets, bringing people together and generating powerful ideas. That's first. Second, universities are evolving, continuously evolving from the days of chalk and blackboard and to now, and it will continue to evolve. And I see again, going back to my point with the knowledge of the house and the innovation. So formal education is important, like a house entering a new place, but with trends, we always renovate it with new skill sets. So platforms like MOOC would enable individuals with formal qualification to re-equip them with emerging skill sets and trends. This will continue. This is an ongoing process. We renovate the place all the time. And moving to my last point, the third point, again, STEM is essential for deep tech industry. So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are fundamentals. There is no way we can escape from it. If we are to build a deep tech company with supporting and accessory departments only, these jobs are going to go away real fast to another low-cost destination or another much more competitive destination with fundamental and core values and talents that are anchored in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We have an edge now in Singapore. We have been built almost relying on our manpower resources and is set to stay here for the future as well. And we have built institutes of eminence, be it with NUS, NTU, SUTD, SMU, and we are very proud of them. It's important to strengthen them further to meet the needs of tens of thousands or even millions of engineers and scientists that we have to produce. We have to allow for flexibility in structures within the universities to expand, while we also equip the students and future graduates to continuously learn through lifelong learning processes, relying on all the online and vibrant processes that exist outside for them to re-equip with new trends and technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan. So, Santhosh, well, let's go to you're ahead, so the lead is for you to lose.
Yeah. So, I just think that, based on all the conversations that you just heard, it should be easy to go from that 60 to 80 because they've been convincing you on why you don't need a formal education. Because look at the key words that was used in that conversation. Soft skills, passion, hunger. Which certificate that you get from a college calls out those things, right? Talks about your grade, talks about your GPA, but all the traits that you're mentioning to be successful is not there in that piece of paper that we are validating. All it validates is the expertise on what you studied. Now, I think what we have to be clear is this is not a debate that you don't need expertise, right? You definitely need expertise. You've got to have, whether it's, and I know multiple questions was there, is that, how can I acquire this and will I go higher for that expertise that I'm looking at? Expertise is baseline, it's foundational. What we're saying is that how you gather that expertise can be in very different ways. You may gather it online, you may gather it through experience, you may gather it sitting in your garage and you may build stuff and learn stuff. Or you may go into a startup environment and get your hands dirty and learn from there. So clearly, expertise is, and that baseline of knowledge is very, very important. What we are arguing against that is that you don't need to go to a $200,000 college degree to ensure that you get that expertise. That's the argument that we're saying. And many of the things that are going to be successful, which I think there's a lot of conversation happened around the soft skills. And sometimes college is the best place to learn soft skills. It's not. Because life and world is the best place to learn soft skills. Because it's an environment that is fluid, that's dynamic. You react in a different way. Things like diversity, inclusion, how do we go back and collaborate? All of those are experiences that you gather when you put your hands dirty and when you jump into really solving those problems. So I think the most important point I would say is that skills and that expertise is important. How you gather them is what we're trying to say is that can be different. And many of the folks online may have their unique ways of becoming experts. It could be bite-sized. Why should I sit through 20 different classes when my interest is on that one subject, where I want to be the best that I can be? Why should I go through those 4 years when I probably have learned it in the first year what 4 years of teaching could be? I may be at a faster pace than someone else does. Now you take all of that and you bucket it in a standardized education system that's not changed by and large for so many centuries, then the output that we produce may not be best in class. And I think that's where the challenge lies.
I mean, you just reminded me there's this meme online, right, that shows all the math you learn, linear algebra and all, and the math you need in your work is actually just an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gary, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I cannot say more, but I think maybe I'll continue with this, right? I think Santhosh's points about skill sets, right, is really something that we know, that you need to have skills. There are people who really deep dive in, and there will be that role, and there will be the expertise that we will lean towards and actually gain something from it. But the skills that you get from really engaging in real world problems are really very, very different. And that's really where the knowledge is really all about, right? Tackling problems that we throw into classroom. Maybe this is our way of going forward. The going forward would be, instead of saying formal and informal, I think what we are saying is that let's take the informal into the formal setting. Let's change the way education is basically used. Let's change the setting of higher institutions, whether you're in a university or whether you're doing a PhD or your master's. Let's not take problems that you simulate out or something that you make an assumption of. Why don't we take problems that is basically in the real world? And this is a real example that we did. We work with SMU University, 6 kids in the computer engineering, and we basically gave them a machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithm that we wanted them to create. And the main thing they were doing is they had to come to the office to start looking at how avocados started to rot, right? From a fresh avocado to what a rotten avocado looks like. And essentially got the machine to basically learn. And when they basically now come out with the kind of work that they did and the team effort, that the collaboration and the knowledge and the different trials and technique that they saw, that why certain model works and certain models couldn't work, certain predictive models could actually get a better score than another predictive model, it was really based on a real rotting avocado. And this, I think, is where formal and informal starts coming into a way where, I mean, like Amrish has already agreed, thankfully, that this is where education that we know today and the word formal is going to change, where a lot of the informal real-life lessons will start coming in. And the university that Mohammed talked about, about SUTD, is really talking about the applied rather than just the theory. So I think to conclude, formal that we know of, the one that we brought up to is maybe not as relevant as the formal education that's going to come, and that formal education that will actually be the one that's going to be powering the economy going forward.
Thank you, Gary. I think that's a nice segue to this question that is the most upvoted one so far. This is for Santhosh and Gary, in fact. Many rankings of formal education universities, but not of informal education. I think is an interesting question. Any examples? Or meaningful informal programs?
Yeah, I think when we talk about change, I think these are the things that we all need to change in. First of all, this concept of ranking, right? The concept that the employers look for degrees. The concept that, many of our GPAs and first class and second class and all of that becomes how we hire, right? We haven't even started making that change. So we have to get on that journey of making that change. Now, the key part that I can give you in a recent example of skills is like cloud is a good example. It was a technology that is probably less than 5 years old. But the most important part is the kind of certifications many of the hyperscalers are driving now, whether it's the AWS certification or the Google or the Microsoft or the Ali certification. So there's multiple that's available that really helps you go operate an environment like cloud. Now, those are the ones that are actually, if you go back and look for some of the cloud jobs that are available, people call out for those certifications, right? Or the validation of the skill, as I would say, because certification is still old school, that industry still requires to go and validate and say, do you have the skills how to go back and operate a cloud-based environment? And it becomes a way in which it enters in, right? So I think these are some of the examples that today you can go back and say, hey, I'm looking for these skills. Can you come in and can you help learn?
Yeah, I think to carry on with that, I think the informal programs that as an employer, I think a must for me would be finance for non-finance manager, right? Whether you're civil engineer, mechanical engineering, or your PhD in data science, I think some of the things that we basically lose out is that you do deep tech for a purpose, and the purpose actually also has the power the company can move forward. And then the other thing I think for an informal part, I'll say that all education should have maybe is a little bit of philosophy. I think logic is kind of lacking in this. I think when I first started my subject, I did economics, political science, and philosophy. My minor was philosophy. I love that class. And people say, why? I say, you go to tutorial, and all the guys said, my lecturer or my class, we were sat on the table, and he says, okay, class, let's discuss. Why is this table a table? And I say, wow, this is a cool class. I don't even have to read anything. We just have to talk. But we have to think, right? And certain things about logic that a lot of the times we hear too much about false logic, right? When I say a lot of fallacies are actually out there where people start to believe in a lot of the things that doesn't make sense, but it seems logical to the people who are listening. And I'll give you a classic example. People say that, for example, birds with wings can fly, therefore chicken with wings, chicken can fly. You know, it's for the new age economy, for my children, they don't really see chicken running in a kampong setting. So they do think that flapping, jumping chickens can fly, right? So this is where some of these fallacies has actually permeate into our society, so much so that it's under our skin that we've started to believe that these are the true logic. So maybe when you talk about informal, you know, these are some of the things that the informal programs should actually be inculcated into our formal program, and then that kind of formal education that we are talking about of the future will make more sense.
Right, so maybe just to round it up, we will do a last poll, right, to see whether the opinions have shifted in any way, right? And maybe while we are waiting for you to answer to the poll questions, the same poll question, is formal education a prerequisite for a deep tech career? I'll just start to sum up as well. I think what we've heard so far is that there was a role for formal education as we knew it, but it needs to evolve. And some institutions are evolving, but today's conversation also suggested to us that maybe institutions are not evolving fast enough. We have a few experimental ones like SUTD and all, but by and large, the rest are playing catch up with the needs of the modern deep tech career professional. And that's an important question for society as well as for institutions. That said, I think for the individuals who are the audience, right, our audience, maybe what I've gotten out of this is really that the starting point for you to think about whether formal education is useful for you or not is to ask whether that part of the formal education gives you the thinking and the doing skills required to solve a problem, right? And if that institution gives that to you, then perhaps this is where a formal institution comes in, a formal program, whether it's master's or PhD comes in, or whether you're better off looking at an informal way to get that expertise and the skills that you need. And with that summary of mine, I'm told the results are ready. So let's just take a look.
Ooh. Look at that.
50-50. So, well,
49.
Can I be like Donald Trump? I don't accept that.
He was on his phone in the last minute.
Yeah, was it an AI chat that somebody created?
we demand a recount. Right?
Yeah.
Formal guy set up bots too.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
I think
Kidding,
what it
yeah.
just tells us is that if we can combine the formal and informal, the institutional with the non-institutional, the combination makes for a powerful one. And for any educational institution, for any company, for any city, country, society, if we move towards that vision, I think we'll be better off for our citizens, our employees, as well as our workforce. And I hope that's the thought I want to leave you with as you continue to embark on your deep tech career. Right? With that, I thank my panelists, Amrish, Mohan, Gary, and Santhosh, and I wish you all the very best for your future.